whole perspective is.
Gary's in there.
This guy's Gary.
Gary. Oh, hi, Gary.
I know that thing doesn't necessarily. I know you're new to working with him, Eric.
It's only been whatever 20 years.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah. All right, and then we've got Simon. Okay. All right. Well, let's get started. Thanks everyone for coming today. We have the first thing up on the agenda is public comments. Do we have any folks from the public who'd like to share some comments? Brian, thanks for joining. Go ahead.
It's not to be me to speak during this portion or during discussion of the Ethan's project in the community forest.
Oh, if that's what you're logging in for, then we do this a little bit differently than the select board. So you're welcome to engage in the conversation at that point if you'd like.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. So let's roll on to the minutes from January 4th. Thank you, Simon.
I am. Is it working? Yeah.
And I need to grab my tea kettle. I'll be right back.
I've got them here if you want to read it. They're a little small, but
let me try to have rather than looking on here. Yeah. I can't seem to get on the guest.
Okay. I think you were absent, so you're a little bit off the hook. Yeah, on the notes.
Okay.
I did not have any corrections or notes for the minutes, Eric.
All right. Thanks, Reed. Anyone else have any suggestions for changes to the minutes from January 4th? Which seems like it was a month ago already. It's been a busy January.
Well, it looked good to me.
All right. Thanks everyone not hearing any. May I have a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting?
I move we approve the minutes from last meeting.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Terry. Any discussion on the motion? All right. I guess we can just do this the regular way. I don't know. I'd call for a motion or a vote when there's in a hybrid format.
I think we still just vote, right? But
yeah,
you have to like keep track of two different.
Yeah. All right. All in favor of approving the minutes from January 4th, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And any abstentions? Gary's going to abstain. Yep. All right. All right, and we've got David logging in now too. Welcome, David.
Morning, everyone.
Okay.
Sorry I'm late.
No worries. No worries. Okay, so that's the minutes for January 4th. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to Ethan and the 2023 Forestry Management Project. Thanks for joining, Ethan.
Sure. Nice to see you all. So, you know, for those, I think we all are aware of the general idea of what's happening at the Catamount Community Forest starting next summer. But just to give you a recap, so we are partnering with the University of Vermont with Gary and Tony D'Amato, Dr. Tony D'Amato, who's also a Williston resident, as part of this project called Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change. So this is a a nationwide, it's international. I think there's one study site in Canada, but mostly nationwide project to study how we can manage forests for adaptability. So like the idea of adaptability is that our world is changing in really unexpected ways. So reacting to climate change and also the different elements of what we call global change, which is sort of climate change, forest fragmentation, deforestation, pollution, non-native invasive pests and pathogens, changing disturbance regimes, all of these things compounded into sort of the sum total of the threats that are facing our forests. So it's climate change, but it's also a lot more. And what we're learning is that it's not just resilience is really important. So like managing our forests so that we can protect their biodiversity and the things that are important, you know, the various critical functions that they serve as the climate changes. So that's like resilience, being resilient to those changes. But then also we need to form adaptive pathways forward. So finding a way for our forests to change so that we can protect all these things in the future. It's not going to be just about like returning to a past condition. It's going to be about helping our forests move into the future and find some future condition, which is going to help them survive and stay healthy. So it's a really exciting project. You know, there's a lot of different components to it. You know, there's going to be, and Gary can elucidate some of these probably in more detail than I can, but we're studying things like forest birds. We're doing underplanting of climate adapted species, including stuff like blight tolerant American chestnut, studying all these different components of how this forest works and how this management is going to affect this forest and how we can sort of use that to learn more about how to manage our forest for adaptability. It is, you know, and then from my perspective, so there's like the scientific perspective, what we can learn from this project and from other projects like this. And then there's also, as there is with every one of my projects, this outreach component, you know, sort of forming a more expansive idea of what it means to take care of a forest. And in this moment in time, right, we're facing forests which are incredibly altered from the legacies of the past, which are facing all these real challenges in the present and which are moving towards this uncertain future. And in light of that, you know, sort of leaving some forests unmanaged is definitely one solution to move towards a functional future. And it is definitely not the solution that is going to protect our biodiversity and protect our forest's ability to sequester and store carbon and protect their wildlife, our important wildlife, you know, that are in the midst of a biodiversity crisis. It's not going to do all those things. It can't, you know, and so the question is really like, what does it mean to take care of our forests at this really strange and crucial moment in time? So the challenging thing about that is that, you know, managing forests is really intimidating and it can be very scary, but it's also really, really important. And so a lot of the work that I do on these town forests is these demonstration projects to help people understand what that looks like, to add some complexity and some nuance to the way that people think about forest management, because there's a lot of rhetoric that sort of sees forest management as like, it's, you know, it's all clear cutting, right? It's all exploitative, it's all extractive, it's all bad, you know, it's all this sort of, we see it all as like one thing. And the reality is that it's complex and it's nuanced. And the forest management that I do is as different from industrial, like really scary, clear cutting forest management as like local organic agriculture is from industrial agriculture, right? So we would never say that because we see like a scary, you know, field of genetically modified wheat in Nebraska, we would never say that like agriculture is bad, right? Because there are different ways to do this thing. And, you know, there's a lot of nuance in like, you know, how we do that. So anyway, so this is a project that I think is really exciting. And from a demonstration perspective, for me, it has a tremendous upside because this is an incredibly well-utilized area. And it really has a chance, I think, to showcase a different view of like what a beautiful forest is, what a healthy forest is, what it means to take care of a forest in a way that a lot of people will see, and that will be very impactful. there are trade-offs with that. One of them is that this is for the same reason that it's an exciting project, this is also like a pretty intimidating one, because there are so many people that love and that use this forest. And at least temporarily, this is going to be tough to understand and accept. Trees are going to get cut. The forest is going to go from being, what it is now, which people love it as it is currently, to looking really messy, and to changing, right? And if you sort of delve into forest ecology, you'll know that a lot of those things that we think of as messy, like dead wood on the ground, dead standing trees, dying trees, gaps in the forest canopy, all of those things that we would think of intuitively as messy are actually like these incredible sources of habitat and, sort of this like really abundant, amazing part of how forests work. And same with change, right? Forests are dynamic, they change all the time. And actually, like if you look at an old growth forests, a lot of the really cool parts of them that if you went into like an old growth forest with a bunch of ecologists or wildlife biologists, they would be focused probably more on death, the legacies of mortality, those dead trees on the ground, those dead standing trees, those gaps in the forest canopy, the multi-generationality, which is all a result of disturbances and death, than they would be probably on the living trees. So change is really, really important, and mortality is really, really important to a forest. So anyway, it's up to me and to a lesser extent us to figure out how we're going to move forward with this project and to explain it in a way that helps people understand why it's good. Because I know why it's good, Gary knows why it's good, Terry knows why it's good, Tony knows why it's good, but to the layperson, it may seem like something that's just really scary and bad. And it's up to us to sort of like enrich that understanding. To that effect, I have already started doing a lot of outreach on the project. One thing I've realized is that people really like to be surprised about stuff like this. And so this is something I've never done any of this to this extent. A year in advance of the project, I've marked all the trees that are going to be cut. And I've actually gone through the area that we're going to be working in and put up signage. There's a big educational sign that has QR code links to resources about how we're managing for forest birds, how we're managing for carbon and climate change, how we're managing for these old forest characteristics, helping young forests become more like old forests, and other resources. And also a legend that says this is what these different markings mean, right? So when you're looking at there, you're going to see like some trees that are marked, that means they're going to be cut. Other trees that are marked with an L, that means they're a legacy tree. That means that they're not going to be cut today or tomorrow or ever, that their sole role is to exist there and to be old trees and eventually to become big dead trees and to provide all of the ecological benefits that come with that. So providing some more context for what people are seeing. We've also installed permanent educational signage, aluminum signage throughout the area that also has QR code links and explains some of the attributes that we'll be managing for. So there's one that's about messiness. There's one that's about dead wood. There's one that's about, I believe, canopy gaps, ecological forestry, legacy trees, all of these different individual components that we're going to be managing for. And my hope is that people are going through that area and that when they're looking at the tree that's marked, that's marked to be cut, and they go, oh, this is really scary, and, to give them some more context of what we're doing and why we're doing it. It remains, another consideration that we have to address is how do we protect trails in that area so that they're not going to be disturbed? As I'm sure many of you know, the town has a lease with the Catamount Outdoor Family Center. So if we were to damage those trails, we would be on the hook to fix them. And while income generation is not a goal of this project, it is going to happen. And we're hoping is that we can then turn that income into, reinvest it in Catamount. Especially, I'm really concerned about the invasive species, the non-native invasive plants. So we're hoping that we can not have to spend that money fixing trails, and that we can instead spend that money on, you know, forest health, on controlling invasive plants and doing other stuff like that. So, so there's also a whole lot that has gone into figuring out how we're going to be as gentle and to take care of those trails as much as possible. We're using specialized logging equipment that has to operate in a very specific way. So it's this machine called a forwarder that actually carries the logs out of the woods rather than skidding them on the ground. I'm asking the operator to take the chains off the tires of the forwarder because they have these little picks that could, you know, disturb the surface of the trails. Putting in the logging contract that all trails need to be cleared after, you know, or in the course of or after their work, and also doing stuff like bringing in a Harley rake and an excavator to make sure that everything is completely smooth afterwards. And our hope is that we will do no damage to the trails and that the trails will be in as good a condition as they are now, or possibly even in a slightly better condition. But it's a risk, and the people at the Catamount Family Outdoor Center are justifiably nervous about it.
Does that mean, if I can interrupt for a second, does that mean only using the forwarder when the trails are dry or not muddy, in other words?
Yeah, so another understanding that we have is that if it's wet, we're not going to work. So, and that's a normal part of like responsible logging in the summertime. I should say also that it is easier to log in the wintertime. The ground is frozen. And in my discussions with Dr. D'Amato and others, for this forest type, we really need to create what's called scarification. So we need to disturb like the top inch or so of soil, because a lot of the species like white pine and red oak that we want to regenerate really require that disturbed soil. So that's why we're doing it in the summertime, even though it makes it potentially more problematic.
That alone is really interesting, Ethan. The choice of what season based on the outcomes you're going for.
Yeah, I really feel like with a lot of this stuff, sometimes I just feel like I'm just really making it hard on myself, you know? But I think
let's do it in the summer, and let's do it right over all the beloved trails.
Yeah, I just want to do it the right way, you know? And I think like with on the other projects that I've done, I had to make a choice about messiness. So my choice was, am I gonna like try and make this project look really neat and tidy so that people will feel more comfortable with it and sort of come to it with a more open mind, come to the concept of managing a forest with a more open mind? Or am I gonna do it in the way that it actually should be done and just like explain the heck out of it? I want to do it the way that it should be done, but that doesn't always mean it's the easiest way. So yeah, it's definitely like our conversations with the Catamount Outdoor Family Center are ongoing. It's really important that we protect those trails, obviously because they're such an important public resource, and I don't want to diminish what we're trying to do in the forest, which is the context within which those trails exist. Like solely for the purpose of the trails. So it's a balance, and it's ongoing. And folks at Catamount Outdoor Family Center are nervous about it. I'm nervous about it too. But I think we have a good plan, and I think it's going to be okay. I know it's going to be okay.
Ethan, what's the plan for balancing public access to those trails during the summer operations? Obviously, that's the busiest time of year.
It's gonna. So we're actually we've made a couple compromises. So for forest bird breeding season in Catamount Community Forest Management Plan, there is no forest management that can occur. Terry, is it until August 1st or August 15th?
I think probably maybe August 15th.
August 15th.
Yeah.
So we can't do it then either. which is, you know, we're missing out on potentially some of the best weather, but that's fine. And then the Catamount Outdoor Family Centers also asked us to delay starting until their camps are over. So that puts us back to like September 1st. And we expect the project will take like a month to 6 weeks. And the trails in the area that we're working in will be closed for that time, which they're also not happy about, you know, because I think it's some of the more popular trails, but also it's 25 acres on a almost 400-acre forest. So there are other trails.
And the safety risk of having people on the trails is not tenable.
No, I think, you know, the other compromise we're making to try and ensure that access is disrupted as little as possible is that woods trace. So that main trail, which goes by the beaver pond, right out of the sort of the northwest corner of the parking lot, that's going to be the log truck road. So there might be a log truck that is traveling on it at like 2 miles an hour once or twice a day. So we think that we can safely keep that woods trace open. And so people can use that to then access all the trails to the north and east. But as we don't want people in the area where we're actually working when we're working there.
And is the operation largely confined to that northwest quadrant of the forest?
Correct. Yeah, everything, you know, everything else is open. Everything else can remain open.
Yeah. It's just the flat part. That's where all the kids want to go biking.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's definitely, and that's also like the reason this is it's so interesting. Like the reason it's flat is because it's a gravel bench. It's at the level of the historic Glacial Lake Vermont, 600 feet in elevation, which is where a lot of those coarser soil particles, sands and gravels were deposited, which is the reason why we have this really interesting like oak pine hemlock community there, which is the reason why we want to do the work, but it's also the reason why it's flat and, you know, why kids want to go there. But yeah, it's going to be, you know, those trails will be, again, it's like a month or 6 weeks, those trails will be closed.
Right. As long as the kids are back in school.
They're definitely not psyched about that for sure.
Yeah. I was just going to say, at least it's not the summer busy season. Most of the races will have concluded. Like I know there are cyclocross races are on the other side of the road. So, you know, that area is generally, it makes sense that they would ask you to wait until all the camps are done, because that's their most heavily used area for those camps.
I think I just wanted to mention that I think we should use this, and I'm sure you're planning on it, Ethan, as an educational opportunity for the students too. They don't always get to use forests. They need to be managed, and so that they understand kind of what's going on, at least from a relatively simple standpoint. I think it's a great opportunity for the students.
Yeah, I want to do some mountain bike events. I know Kim gave me that idea.
I'll help you.
That'd be awesome.
Will the trails be closed on weekends too? Presumably you won't be working on weekends.
They will not be working on weekends, but they'll still be closed in that area. Or actually, who knows? I mean, sometimes with, you know, if they get some bad weather, these loggers sometimes work 6 days, but if they get bad weather and they're sort of playing catch up, they might just work 7 days until it's done.
Yep. Okay.
I thought it would be a good opportunity for folks to explore the other parts of Catamount too, because, you know, maybe, you know, people do get stuck on just riding those trails over there, and now that'll be closed, and that will bring them over to the other side of the road, or, you know, opportunity to explore. And my other thought was that this isn't the first time that there's been logging done at the outdoor center while there were mountain bike trails there. So when was it, back in 2014?
2016 was that area in the Three Rivers Trail area.
Right. And so how did that affect Catamount? I mean, obviously they managed through it, and the logging was done, and you know, the outdoor center, you know, was able to work around that.
Yeah, like I said, I know we can do it, and it's just at this point, you know, setting ourselves up for success, and that means just like making a really ironclad plan of how this is going to work and understanding, like how we're going to, what do we do under different situations. I had this logger I used to work with who would be walking a project and he would say, Ethan, what happens if, and then he would just like go through like all the things that could potentially happen. What happens if we have a bad winter? What happens if such and such happens? And it was actually, at the time, it was a little bit annoying, but it was also a good exercise, right? Because we want to know what's, we want to be prepared for, what happens if X, Y, and Z occurs.
The other good thing to know is that when the Catamount was, purchased, that it was written into, contract or whatever with the town that there was money put aside, $10,000 or something, that was going to be used to repair the trails if needed. And then it's also good to know that if there is revenue that's generated, the town will use that money to repair the trails. And it'd be nice to be able to use it for the invasive control. But there is money available that would be put towards bringing the trails back up to the level standard that they were before the operation.
Yeah, and so I think Catamount is going to give us a budget. They're working on some kind of a budget about how much it would cost to fix the trails. I think that when we get that, it's going to be like a high and a low number, and I think that high number is going to be like really high, because I think they're probably comparing it to like what would happen if there was like 3 foot deep ruts everywhere, and everything was destroyed. And that's not going to happen. It's not like, it will not happen, period.
Not on your watch.
No, and even like on this site, like you can't, it's not apples to apples. Like you can't, this is a like extremely dry, well-drained, flat site. And so there are going to be analogs of what we're doing, which is like wet soil on a steep slope that's rocky, and like where you have these tires just like churning through mud. And that is not the situation that we find ourselves in. It's not going to be like that. And also like the crew that we're hoping to work with is not that kind of a crew that would ever do that. Terry pointed out, which I'd actually not thought about for a while, the fact that they like do all the forest management work at like, what is it? The Marsh Billings.
Yeah. In Woodstock, Vermont.
Yeah. Marsh, on these like beautiful carriage trails that they have to keep together. They do a lot of work on other town forests like this that have trails like this.
Heinsberg, you do tons of stuff at Heinsberg. There's so much mountain biking there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I just think, so if you see that number and they're like $100,000, just know that is not the reality of what could even possibly occur. It's just sort of like they're thinking about the worst possible situation, independent of the type of site we're on, the type of equipment that we're using, when we're operating, et cetera, et cetera.
I was able to go out with Ethan the day that for the representative from, if we do end up going with this Longview forestry group, really, I was very impressed, was very aware of how important the trails were to the outdoor center. I looked on their website and they had a lot of great information about, everything about, the sustainability of the forest, and, just their whole mission statement was very impressive. So.
Yeah, it's a good crew to be working with, and the reason that we're working with them is specifically because of the trails. Specifically because they're the only crew in the state that has like this specialized equipment that can take care of the trails in this way. And honestly, like as a result of that, we're foregoing probably a substantial amount of income that we could potentially earn and which could potentially be reinvested again to address this really serious, like invasive, non-native invasive plant problem, to work with this specific crew and to, just for their impact on the trails. So we're really, really doing our due diligence to make sure that we protect them.
Hey, Ethan.
Yeah.
I asked myself if I was talking with somebody, I understand what's going on and why we're doing it and how it's likely to play out. But if I was talking to somebody, how do I direct them to things? I did find the story map on through the town website's link.
Mm-hmm.
I think I went in through the Catamount Forest Committee page, and then to the forestry management, and then to the amended version of the 2018 plan. And eventually I found the link to the story map. Is that kind of the best place to direct people to start, or is there another entry point?
No, I think so. What I would do, Reed, is I would send them to my link tree. So it's if you search for Linktree Chittenden County Forester, there is not yet something up on there that is like, specific to Catamount, except for on my YouTube channel, there is a Catamount Community Forest channel, which has like five videos about Catamount. There's not yet like me being like, let me break down each individual component of this, but there is, but I think on my Linktree, what they will find is like, they can go to my YouTube channel and watch literally 100 videos on carbon and climate change, climate resilience, climate adaptability, these nuances of forest management, how we understand it. They can find that story map also on my Linktree, and they can find story maps of other town community forests that I've worked in with some more details about those.
Yeah.
Archive of articles that I've written for for local newspapers and for Northern Woodlands, interviews, and just to provide them a lot of context that I think will enrich their experience. And then I'm working on, I think what I'm going to do is make a story map about this project specifically, because the story map that you're referring to is about the work that we did in winter.
Yeah,
2019,
21. Yeah,
and that was for forest birds. So I want to make a story map about this project specifically soon.
It did talk about many of the same topics, but it wasn't about this specific project. So I want to make sure that if I do talk with people, I can send them somewhere. So I'll send them to your Linktree. That sounds good.
Yeah.
And Ethan, will you be doing some walks in the spring, hopefully to bring people out there and explain?
Yeah, we did one in last summer, which was well attended, got some coverage on WCAX, and I want to do more. Those mountain bike events, and then also events with different focuses. We're talking about doing trying to get Mark Labar from Audubon, Vermont to come out and do another bird banding thing, because that's just like a really cool way for folks to learn more about how we want to manage our forest for bird habitat, and to talk about some of the work we've already done and how we expect the work that we're doing to benefit bird habitat. So there's going to be a lot of other opportunities. I'm going to be writing articles like for the Williston Observer. There's going to be an unavoidable mass of resources.
Deluge of Ethan.
That's my strategy with these things, is to make myself unavoidable in these circumstances. And I think that's important for a few different reasons. One is that people consume information in a lot of different ways. And so just trying to really access all the different ways that people might come across some more information. And then also because we're messaging that this is not something that we're ashamed of. This is an exciting project and we're proud of it. And we're not trying to hide it. There's nothing to hide. I think that is really, really important.
Ethan, do you feel like the folks at Catamount, is any part of their nervousness like a fear that they can't explain what's going on to like complaining or upset or like concerned members of the public? And do you think they need like talking points? Like, I know it looks scary, but this is for to help the forest weather climate change because we all love this place? Or like, I don't know what the right,
Yeah.
that's probably not the right talking point, but do you think that's any part of their nervousness, or do you think it's like?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think that they're, but the things they've expressed to me that they're nervous about are, you know, more damage to the trails and having to close the trails for that month or 6 weeks. But yeah, I think that, you know, they're gonna get some questions, and I think they're sort of miscellaneously nervous about the whole thing. But
Yeah.
hopefully, yeah, I think that that's a good point, that we should be giving them resources to explain. I do have that informational signage that has all those links, and it is hung up like at the kiosk. But
okay, so somebody can scan, like somebody can scan the QR code right at the kiosk.
Correct.
So
yeah, or it's actually on the side. Yeah, it's on the side of the like rental.
Yeah, the rental repair building. Yeah,
which was some other like signage about the area, the forest.
Because I'm sure they're gonna get like emails and phone calls and stuff, but that's gonna be, they have maybe different staff is gonna be handling that, but having the person who's like the first face somebody can walk up to and ask or complain, it would be nice to be like, great question. Do you have a smartphone?
Yeah, because it's high school kids a lot in that kiosk.
Like, hey, scan that QR code. And then it's not their deal to try to explain. It's like, scan the code, learn about it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I want to make this in every way. I want to make this project as easy as possible for them, as I possibly can, including like they shouldn't have to explain it. They should be able to point somewhere and go, yep, check it out, resources over there. That's an excellent point.
I think there one point we had a meeting just a week ago, was that, and it's true that the trails are their only asset, the outdoor center. And so they really need to, and that's their charge, is to maintain those trails and to keep them in good shape. So that is a concern. And it's,
and you know, this project, you know, and I think Hans made this point, and I think it's a valid one. You know, this project I would argue benefits us all, right? Because it's like we're going to learn more, do research on climate adaptation, and learn more about the way that we can manage forests for global change, and inform people's understanding of like what responsible stewardship of our forest looks like, X, Y, and Z, in this highly visible place. And so that I would argue is a benefit to us all, but this project doesn't really benefit them in any way. You know, it's an inconvenience. So, you know, I think that's just something to acknowledge, you know, that that's true, you know, and one of the things, of course, that we also need to consider is that they don't own the land. The town does now. And so, you know, it's up to us as the landowners to think about, you know, this recreational resource is incredibly important. And so is, you know, forest resilience and adaptability and education and outreach. I think there's a really amazing opportunity right now at Catamount, as you see all of the amazing work that Terry and others have done with forest birds and grassland birds, shrubland birds, and, you know, the wood duck boxes, and then the work we've done with the brontosaurus, creating the golden winged warbler habitat, and seeing all these like different educational signs pop up over the place, and seeing all these different kinds of management, all these different kinds of habitat. I think there's a real opportunity for Catamount to be, in addition to being like an amazing recreational resource, to also be like a demonstration forest. You know, it's a place that'll be managed in a lot of different ways, that'll have this really rich, vibrant habitat, and that people will love it for that reason. Eventually.
I think that the outdoor, I think in the short term, you know, it's true that there's not a benefit to the outdoor center, but I think in the long range, I think if they look down the road as they expand their, you know, programs and things, that, you know, just the forest health is going to, you know, get better, and they'll be able to use that as an educational site. Just have a better forest.
Yeah, and if, you know, future. I would hope that in the future, right, that we'll be increasingly recognizing like the positive role that, you know, responsible management can have on adaptability and resilience. And, you know, and that will become something that people are excited about. And when that happens, you know, it might be the Catamount Family Outdoor Center that is like put forth as this representation of like what it means to balance these things, to balance recreation and adaptability, which could be a benefit to them, I would hope. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make that so, right? That we're changing this dialogue about, you know, what it means to be the responsible steward of a forest, and also the responsible steward of like a forest-based recreation place. So like I'm hoping that will ultimately be an asset to them, to their business, you know, but in the short term, you know, it'll be a challenge, and they're working with us and they're doing their best, and they're uncomfortable with it, and I get it. Will you excuse me just for 1 minute? I just have to grab my charger.
All right, so any other questions we can think of for Ethan? We have about 15 minutes left, correct? Am I reading the agenda right? I know I don't have the best track record reading the times on the agenda.
Did Brian Forrest have a comment about this topic?
Oh yeah, Brian, did you have something specific you wanted to comment on?
Yes, I do.
I suppose that's probably for Ethan though.
It would be, but it's mostly directed to this committee. It really seems like the enthusiasm that this committee has for this project puts me in the position of Sisyphus pushing a rock up a hill this morning. But my concern is that I have no objection to the proposal as it stands. My objection to implementing the proposal because it seems like a proposal out of time. That's a proposal that should have been done in the 1990s or earlier, because it has such a large span of time to find out if it's going to work or not. And in the meantime, we have a very short time to sequester carbon, and this is not helping us do that. And sequestering carbon is essential for the preservation of mankind in the next, cutting it in half by 7 years now, and balancing it out by 2050. And this is not helping us. There are a lot of good intention projects that have all scientific background to it, but it's a little project too late. As a society, we seem to be schizophrenic about the issue of climate change, which will stand up an energy committee and hire an energy coordinator, but we won't put a penny towards implementing the plan and seeing that it actually does what we passed for it to do. You can hear a journalist talk about climate change 1 week, and then a week later lamenting about we're not growing fast enough to sustain our economy. So at some point in the next immediacy, we've got to make hard choices, and I don't think this is an appropriate. It may be great for the birds and the trees and animal life, and I'm sure it is, but that's a long-term thought, and the saving of this planet from overheating is a major concern. And as a society, we're not addressing it. On one part of our brain, we're addressing it. Another part of our brain, we put it in another box, and we're not addressing it. We don't have a prohibition against burning organics now. We still have a McNeil plant, which burns 700,000 tons of wood a year in that plant. And we say it's green and it's fine, but it's another where we turn a blind eye to the largest polluting source in Vermont is the McNeil plant, the Rygate plant up there.
Can I just comment on that, Brian? I think one thing that maybe you guys aren't aware, but we start to learn from this immediately. We've done, this is like the 4th or 5th one of these studies we put in as a research group, and there's other ones nationwide and into Canada, but the one that we did in New Hampshire, which I think we started in 2016, we have 30 or 40 scientists from throughout the region, as well as land managers, that started to learn from that as we were doing it even, and have learned a lot about the impacts of these different treatments over the last 4 or 5 years. So we don't have to wait to learn from it and to know the impacts.
Well, I'm sure that your scientists are learning all the time, but that's not my concern. My concern is sequestering carbon. We allow land developers to cut their trees down and burn them on site, or send them to be burned and go into the atmosphere. We're not getting serious about a existential issue here, and that's my main concern. I'm not concerned about scientists learning anything.
Yeah, well, I think this study is going to answer part of what you're talking about. It's helping us better understand what treatments we can impose to even sequester more carbon over time. So it's going to.
We know that a forest left by itself will sequester much more carbon than a carbon managed. It's just the diversity of plants in a unmanaged forest sequesters more carbon than.
So there's a couple things we should talk about there. One is the difference between carbon sequestration and storage. So what you're talking about is carbon storage, not carbon sequestration.
That's the same thing.
And it's not the
same thing.
It's not the same thing. So the sequestration of carbon is the ability of an ecosystem or anything to suck carbon out of the air.
Right.
Carbon storage is the ability of that ecosystem to store that carbon.
Once it's taken out of the air, it's stored.
Well, but it's a carbon cycle.
Or trunk form, it's stored.
It's stored until it's released, right? When it decays. So the carbon cycle, it's a cycle, right? So it's stored for a certain amount of time. When that tree falls over, when it dies and it decays, a certain amount of that carbon is released back into the atmosphere. So it's not stored forever. And there are different facts about how forests sequester carbon versus how they store carbon. So like a forest's most rapid carbon sequestration is in a young forest between about 30 to 70 years of age. So when those trees are very young and they're growing very quickly, a carbon's maximum carbon storage is in an older forest, right?
So rate of storage is not as important as quantity stored. And that's what I'm concerned about. The old growth forms store more because their trunks are expanding their trunks are larger, so they're storing more carbon, they expand every year, and their canopy is larger, so they're storing more carbon. So a big tree, an old tree, does sequester more carbon than a young tree, but we know that a young forest sequesters more carbon than an old forest. No.
And we know that an old forest stores more carbon than a young forest.
It sequesters it at a larger rate, but does not sequester more carbon. The rate of sequestration is faster, but
I'll just say, as someone who teaches forestry, and Gary can say this also, Ethan's correct, and I do think you're conflating storage and sequestration in your mind, Brian, which is tricky, but Ethan's correct.
No, the rate of storage is faster in a young forest.
Brian, I do have to say that we do have two people in the room with doctorates in forestry. I'm not one of them, but Gary and Kim are. So I think that to take their points.
I can, if necessary, I can pull off doctorates who will back what I'm saying. So it's not because I don't have a doctorate that what I'm saying is not true.
No, okay. So, but to your point about, this work being sort of out of time, one of the tricky things also to understand is that is the role of climate resilience and climate adaptability in a forest's ability to store carbon in the long term. So if we can't understand forests and we can't understand all of the pieces and parts that make them work, they are going to be destabilized by climate change, as they already are, and they're going to be continually will be more destabilized, and their ability to sequester and store carbon in the long term will be degraded. And so one of the things that is commonly misunderstood, so we look at old growth forests, and old growth forests are very diverse and they're very resilient. An old growth forest and an unmanaged forest are not the same thing. So the reason why an old growth forest is so biodiverse and so resilient is as a result of elements that many of our young forests, including the area that we're working in Catamount, don't have, right? So structural diversity, different sizes and ages of trees, species diversity, different species of trees, dead wood on the ground, again, like dead standing trees. All of these are elements that lead to that forest being able to sequester and store more carbon long term. When we have young forests, like we have, almost all of Vermont's forests are 60 to 100 years old, they don't have that resilience. And so they're actually much more vulnerable to large scale natural disturbances, to different pests and pathogens that then lead to a larger release of carbon. So like the ability of an old growth forest to store more carbon is predicated on its ability to be resilient. And the way that they do that is by diversity, diversity in structure and also diversity in species, which allows them to weather different types of disturbances without experiencing a large scale natural disturbance. When there's a large scale natural disturbance, it causes a massive release of carbon, right? So what we want to do is we want to use management as a tool to try and make this forest more like an old growth forest, centuries sooner than it would naturally occur, and to mitigate those vulnerabilities actively. And so that is something that, like, if you look at a lot of people, when they think about like a forest, an unmanaged forest sequestering or storing more carbon, they're looking at particularly Bill Keaton's research, right? So Bill Keaton had this one paper that shows different types of forest management, and using a modeled how much carbon they would store in comparison to an unmanaged forest. The problem with that model, and what Dr. Keaton himself has said that it's widely misinterpreted, is that number one, it assumes no change. It assumes that everything will remain the same, with which climate change, we know that's not going to happen. And it also assumes none of these catastrophic natural disturbances. So we're dealing with a world in which, and again, this is not even to talk about balances between what we're trying to do with respect to carbon and climate change and what we're trying to do with respect to biodiversity. Because we're also, in addition to being in a climate crisis, we're also in a biodiversity crisis. And we know that a forest's ability to exist and to be healthy depends on its biodiversity. Right. It's not, those two things are not separate. So we're trying to balance all of these different things at once.
But this is a long-term plan. You're not going to find out much that'll help us within 30 to 50 years. And a forest to catch up to, once a forest is cut, to catch up to itself would take about 100 years before that tree can, for the new.
So I think what you're describing is.
Hold on, let me finish.
Okay.
So that I think we're talking for planning, and it's great to plan for the future, but we're talking about a 100-year future versus a 50-year future that we have to get this to sequester as much carbon as we can, or else we're done for. Because the Earth, as you're cutting down trees, the Earth is heating up, and every tree that's cut down is helping for the planet to heat up. And I bless your project, and I think it's a great one and worthy. It's not the time for this. That project is long gone. We're not in that stage anymore of planning for grandiose experiments. We're in the time period of saving our skins here, and this project will not help us.
All right, thanks, Brian. I think there's also the point to be made that this is a research project that's occurring on 25 acres of land here in Williston, and the research benefits could potentially far outweigh the carbon sequestration that we may see from and storage that we may see from the project from that acre. David, you've got your hand up.
Taking carbon out of the air is the essential issue of our time.
All right. Brian?
Thank you.
David,
For,
I have a question for Ethan. Yeah, thanks, Eric. To the point of the use of the wood and how you've gone through and you've already labeled all of the trees that are going to be part of this operation. What portion of that is going to places like the McNeil plant for incineration and energy production versus, say, high grade timber that could effectively be, to this point of long-term storage of wood? It may continue to store that carbon in the form of other materials. Just, I do share the concerns with incineration, but that's a totally different topic.
Yeah, I'm so bummed that Brian just left. Zero is getting sent to McNeil's. And yeah, I mean, there might be some incidental like pine pulp that may become paper, but for the most part, we're most of that stuff is going to stay on the ground. Its best and highest use at this point is as deadwood and habitat, soil. And so everything, or the vast majority of what's getting pulled out, will be sent locally to Lamel Lumber just 5 miles down the road and turned into durable wood products, dimensional lumber. We're also hoping to see if we can't use some of it on site. So Terry's been really involved in trying to restore that sheep barn that's on site, and there's a potential we could use some of that for that project as well.
Thank you.
I put a document in the chat in case folks were like, this is the first time I've heard that sequestration and storage are not the same, which also I think Brian left, but it would be cool if he looked at it. But anyway, it's in the chat if anyone is confused by that difference.
And that's tough. And so that's like, what we all just saw, like that's a common, a sort of common line of questioning that we receive. And it's, and it's based on a couple points which are valid, which we should know, right? So the points that are valid is that, in certain circumstances, unmanaged forests will store more carbon than managed forests. Not always, but in certain circumstances, they will. The other is that unmanaged forests, and he wasn't really making a biodiversity argument, but unmanaged forests also have a really important role in our landscape. And and so it's like a lot of people have figured that out and figured out that unmanaged forests are cool and they're important, and that is totally true. And that does not in any way diminish the importance of what we're doing. That what we're learning is that we need a diversity of different approaches to provide different benefits to our forests over time and to protect the different parts of them that are important. And so I view, the work we're doing at Catamount as completely compatible and even complementary with also leaving some forests unmanaged. Like in the Heinsberg Town Forest, we're doing forest management over hundreds of acres, and we also have hundreds of acres that are in unmanaged reserve. And those two things are both part of the same picture of how we navigate this moment that we find ourselves in. So just, when I encounter lines of questioning like that, there's a few different nuances of like, what's sequestration, what's storage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's important to acknowledge that that is part of the truth. It's just not the entirety of what we're trying to do to protect our forests.
So I just want to, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention that another piece of this that's you'll hear from people and is, we as a society need wood products too. So we have to learn how to manage forests in such a way that we balance all these things. And I think that's the beauty of this study and the companion studies all over the country of this, is it gives us the information on how to best manage it to adapt.
I'm wondering if I've seen some groups, you mentioned Bill, Ethan, when Ethan mentioned Dr. Keaton, that's Bill Keaton, and he's at UVM. And he has, as Ethan said, done a number of studies on forest carbon that have been widely taken out of context and kind of miscited, like half-cited. It's upsetting to him. I wonder if like inviting him in to do like the full carbon like explanation would be helpful so that at least we have like the information, and then would be able to reshare it in case that line of questioning happens, because it's like really complex.
I'll just add to that, Kim. I think Tony D'Amato has done a lot of work on that too. And since he's involved with this study, he knows it more intimately.
Yeah.
I think he'd be just as good, if not better than Bill, because of his involvement with the study and his close knowledge.
I'm just thinking that like a lot of people will say, oh, Bill Keaton's work showed. And it would be nice to be able to be like, actually what Bill Keaton's work showed was.
Yeah, Tony knows Bill's studies as well, but Tony's published on the same subject as well.
All right.
I think
so. I'm going to move it over to Terry, and then we're going to need to wrap this up to move on with other pieces of our agenda.
So I just wanted to comment on, Ethan made a mention of the sheep barn at Catamount Community Forest. And so I was hoping, and the committee is working on this, just beginning, and they've talked about it over the last couple of years, is to, while Ethan is harvesting logs out of the forest, is to figure out what pieces of beams and wood would be needed to repair the sheep barn to bring it back to, I mean, it's usable, but it is needing some work. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity to use the wood to repair the barn, which probably the barn was built with wood that was from that forest anyway, and bring in a portable sawmill and use that as an educational opportunity to show people this is maybe how they used to do this, and this is going with the wood is from the land is going back into the an existing building. So just
I think we need a more nuanced view of what the life of wood is, and some of it is storing carbon, some of it is in living trees, and if it's not one of those, what do we do with it? It doesn't just necessarily get burned. We need to have a diverse set of opportunities to make benefit out of it. That's a really nice idea.
Yeah, it draws that line between, you know, what we're doing, because the other thing is I sometimes like don't talk about this enough, but we need resources. And wood is like a local renewable resource. It's a pretty good one when a lot of the resources we're consuming are non-renewable, non-local,
non-biodegradable.
Yeah,
non-biodegradable. Like it's a pretty, like when you spill wood on the ground, it doesn't become a super fun sight. And it was produced at no cost, and and we can harvest it while making a living system more biodiverse, and more resilient to climate change. And that to me is just like such a powerful thing, and that's really like, maybe we could do an event with Tony. I mean, I know Tony's working on an update of this publication called The Illusion of Preservation, which is really trying to draw those lines between like where wood comes from, where stuff comes from, and this idea that, just because we push the extraction of these resources out of our communities doesn't mean that they don't still occur, right? So it's sort of like preservation for the rich, exploitation for everybody else, and we're just displacing the costs of our consumption and of our lives on other people and using resources that are actually less sustainable. So that could be another sort of separate thing that Tony could talk about that could be really powerful.
All right. Thank you, Ethan. This has been a good conversation as always. Happy to have you back in again at some point.
The
project moves forward.
You might be back again.
Yeah. And also, again, I think I said this the last time I was here, but I would also welcome anyone's thoughts on outreach, messaging, stuff like that. I'm definitely, in a way that will be specifically resonant with the Williston community in particular.
Excellent. Thank you.
You bet.
You.
Have a good day, everybody.
You too.
You too.
Be safe on the roads.
Bye.
All right. Next up is the Glacier specific plan and Conservation Committee Representative Hawley. How's it going with the Glazer specific plan?
Well, it hasn't, the actual representative piece of it hasn't really started yet. I mean, I don't know, when is that?
So the Planning Commission sort of selected their last member for the committee last night.
Okay.
So I think probably what's going to happen is when Emily comes back from her vacation, she's going to set up the first meeting with the applicant team to get the ball rolling. So I put together that document that just says what the charge is and some of the items that the Conservation Commission probably be expected to weigh in on. And I think at the last meeting, everyone was keen to like hear what your thoughts were on what needs to be considered, and also just have a quick discussion with you about it, so everyone can go in.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we're not quite at that point because I haven't really delved into this as much, and I was hoping to, to do that before the meeting and be, respond to the meeting as well as inform you guys of what's going on in those meetings. I mean, I think in general, I question the kind of subjectivity of the town's language around what's above and beyond what you would normally get out of one of these developments. So I think that's going to be the tough piece of this, is that are we being given or more than normal, and is it enough to justify giving these guys permission to start building immediately?
Yeah.
So I think that's
definitely something that would be good for the commission to weigh in on, and that's something the DRB member will also sort of weigh in on, because they know exactly what we get from a regular discretionary permit.
Right. Yeah.
So they're going to be able to sort of say, well, we can't, no, we get that anyway.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the good thing about we've been through this, and as well as the development review board. And the other pieces, there's wetlands on the property, and I can imagine, like others have said, well, I'm not going to develop in there, but then, like you said, Simon, that's normal. You can't develop in a normal project in wetlands and buffers and such. So I don't know. I'm going to review all this and keep an open mind going into the committee meeting, and I'm happy to have input from you guys. And I'll, I think we're going to meet once a month. Is that what it was, Simon?
Yeah, Thursdays, either 1 or 2 meetings a month, depending on, I think, probably how long it takes the applicant to respond to what the discussion is.
And then there's a report back in June or July, for the final report.
I think they'll probably report back a little more frequently than that to the Planning Commission. I think the deadline, was extended to August.
Oh, okay.
And that's the deadline when the Planning Commission sort of wants to know one way or the other what, is this going to work?
Right. So I think that's going to be the crux of this whole thing is, and we don't have any, in the language, you can read it, it doesn't say, oh, it has to be 20% more conserved land than normal, or, things like that. So
it's a subjective.
Right. And it's a tricky one to set a precedent for as well, because if this project's come through with whatever they propose, then somebody from then on will say, well, I can do the same thing with a little bit extra and get it approved to move forward in the development.
But I mean, I always think about precedents, they cut both ways. There's a bad precedent and there's a good precedent.
Sure.
If we get something a lot better than we would otherwise get from a regular discretionary permit, surely that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And the other piece is this is really visible, and the whole community is thinking about it. So it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves through this process.
Yeah.
So I just like to say, I just summarize what I think initially might be things that the Conservation Commission might be interested in.
Yeah, that's enough.
Thanks, Simon. I was going to ask about that. Terry, you had your hand up. Did you have a question or a comment?
Just some comments. No question, but if Simon wants to go through this first, and then I can.
No, this was just to really try and get people thinking. If you've got comments, then you're already thinking, which is good.
So do you want me to say what I was going to say?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to, say, and I'm sure, everybody knows this was a high priority parcel that was picked out through our working with Jens, I guess. And It's the wildlife corridor in that area, and the way the land is laid out, you know, possibly that would cut off that corridor. And Gary mentioned the wetlands, and I know that there was a lot of comment. There was quite a bit of comment from the public, and one was from Carl Runge, former member, and he was saying, you know, how about half of that, and maybe keep the lower part, the development there, and then conserve the upper part. You know, has there been any conversation with Glacier about conserving that? Has he talked to the land trust? Does he know some of the opportunities and pluses for him if he did conserve half of it and only, you know, did the lower part of the development? And then I was on the phone with Peggy Larson, and it didn't have anything to do with this. My email got scammed and she had responded to it. And she's an elderly lady. She's 87 years old. So I thought, boy, I better chat with her and find out what she had done. And so in conversation, I found out that she's selling her home.
She is.
She lives right there on the corner of Glacier, and she has a, you know, not a huge parcel of land, but you know, an access to Mountain View Road. And she said, well, you know, I'm an old lady and I need to sell my land. And she said, there's a possibility for, you know, another few houses to be built on my land. You know, they could, you know, tear down my house and continue that road right onto Mountain View. So I don't think the proposal, I don't know, you know, who knows what's going to happen, but there could be, that road could go all the way through that 11 acres that would be conserved. So that's just something to, you know, think about, that this could be changing. And
corner.
yeah, the basic, the bottom line, I think, and which we saw it here on Christmas Lane years ago when the Hershkowitz was going to put in 5 or 6 houses. It really, the bottom line was money. He didn't want a development named after him. He didn't, you know, he was leaving, he was moving. He didn't care. He wanted money. And when he worked with the land trust, which was because of the neighborhood got together with him and said, David, you could work with the land trust and you could come out ahead as opposed to, you know, putting in this development. He actually did go with conservation, but he also got the money that he needed. So I just hope that that's going to be something that's looked into. So.
Yeah, that's a good point about the Hershkowitz property, Terry, and we'll see where this one goes. Okay, Simon, did you want to review your staff comments on this?
Yeah, and just also on that point, I think Matt, in discussing this, has made the point that there's nothing that stops the applicant pursuing both options in parallel. So they can explore them both at the same time if that's something they're interested in.
So what can you answer, Simon? What if they chose the normal path?
Yeah.
And similar to what they're proposing, how long would it be before they can start building, and how, you know, would it be 5 years before they could do anything, or?
Yeah, so probably at least.
Okay.
Because growth management is very competitive in the RZD at the moment. And, you know, subdivisions like Catamount have to, probably going to take them another 5 years to get everything they need. And then there's other things coming up as well.
And they're staggered and overlapped, but still.
Yeah. So I think that's, in my view, that's why they're doing this, because they know that it's going to be a pretty big delay. At least.
So a full build out of this might, you know, it might be 10 or 15 years down the road before it's done if they went the normal path.
Yeah.
Can I just ask the philosophy of, I mean, I think I know it, but since there's such a need for housing now, well, let me tell you what I think I know, but I'm not positive. The philosophy is we slowly build out so that our resources in town can keep up with building. Is that correct?
Yeah,
that's the
theory behind it. By gradually slowing the pace of development, we can keep pace with, you know, the fire department and the school. I think, as I understand it, it sort of goes back a lot to the impact on the schools in the 90s.
Yes. And it's predictability. You know how many units are going to be added per year, you know where they're being added. And the other thing that growth management, and I'm not an expert in growth management, but I talk a lot about it with my dad, of course. One of the other things that it does is it creates competition, and that competition is for points. And those points include things like affordable housing. There's a whole list, and some of the things that might get skipped over if it was just a flat yes, no vote on whether they can build or not, become more important. The nuance of, well, how are you building? What are you providing to residents in the area as part of your build comes into play, and that helps us get better outcomes in theory. Than just like a yes, no vote, and then they start building when they start building and finish when they finish.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
All right. Can I'll jump in.
Got a question. Yep.
Yeah, I raised my hand on this point, but I thought that was a really good clarifying question. I participated in some of those public meetings, and it was striking to me how few sort of public or town-wide benefits this project was presenting itself as being materially advantageous and worthy, therefore, of skipping this 5-10 year growth management process. My takeaway from well, I'll just be blunt, my participation in that is directed towards better connectivity of multi-use pathways and better pedestrian and safety in the Mountain View and Stage Road area, which are just tremendously highly congested area, very unsafe for any form of pedestrian use. And that's why the town map has a multi-use path being listed as desirable for the Mountain View area, is to basically start connecting those things. And this is a critical point of that juncture. And as there's other pathways in Northridge, there's other pathways in other areas. And this project really didn't promise delivery on any of those things. And in my sort of read of what they were offering, it was basically like, here's a view shed and we'll protect that view shed, and that's about it. And I think that if the town is actually going to jump 10 years of growth management for the sake of this project, it ought to extract a whole lot more out of the project. Otherwise, they should put themselves in line like the rest of them. And that was what was really strange to me too. And I said these comments to the Planning Commission, was that like it felt like a hostage negotiation where if you don't give us this authority to develop the plan right away, I'm going to sell it to the highest bidder and they're going to develop it, to the nth degree. And it was like, it was just a threat. It was just an unveiled threat. And frankly, as a town resident, I didn't appreciate it. As a newly sworn in commissioner, I think that Gary, I appreciate that you're going to be volunteering in that position. I hope to meet you real soon. But I had a lot of questions about this project.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think one quick comment. Yeah. Sorry, Reed. I kind of feel the same way. I mean, even if they do sell it to the next highest bidder, they still have to go through most of the same process, and they have to get in line to start in 10 years. And we're going to demand viewscape issues and wetland protections and all that too. So I don't think you're going to get much different in that. But I also, like you, and I hope the rest of us, I think it needs to be pretty special to qualify for this and giving a lot more than what you would normally give. That's my
the big outpour. Yeah, the big outpouring from the townspeople was for Windswept Farm. I think that was a big contingency, that to save the farm, and that maybe it would be more of a win-win for the glaciers if they thought about conserving it. At least half of it, as opposed to doing the whole build out and only developing that part down at the bottom near Wildflower Circle, and then leave the rest, open. I really, the outpouring for the Windswept Farm was pretty incredible. And I think that kind of really pushed pushed, all the comment that was given.
I'm not sure how many of those were Williston residents, to be candid. A lot of them were self-identified.
I think they had, maybe their children had bought their kids to Windswept, for the horse program. Maybe that's where
the Williston patrons, at least.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which brings.
Is there a way that we can see, like, I can't remember if we have done this already, and if we have, forgive me. Can we look at other projects that have met the burden of, like,
there are not many.
Pine Ridge.
And Pine Ridge.
Pine Ridge passed.
And then we got that land. And then what have the other ones? So that must have been like right before I came onto the conservation commission.
And NECS failed 2 years ago.
Right.
I think it was. That was different because it wasn't so much natural resource based. It was more trying to figure out a way to provide connectivity and stuff. Is in the industrial.
Right.
Is it in the industrial? Is it right on the line between the growth center?
They're in the Gateway zoning district west, which is a really weird little zoning district. And they were talking about providing a footpath and a bus shelter. Footpath to nowhere and a bus shelter that wasn't really. Well, I think it sort of the wheels came off a little bit when they were trying to figure out exactly whether this definitely could be delivered. Yeah. And who was responsible. The other one that I think was a long time ago was where the solar farm is, down just off Route 2A. West of Redmond Road. South of Hurricane Lane. Okay. There's a solar farm there. And I think.
What kind of farm?
A solar farm.
So solar, yes.
And in that case, we also acquired land, Simon?
I've not looked into it. I think there was some sort of highly spec'd out office park was supposed to go in there. And they did all the work to get it. And then the applicant who was going to build it fell away. And then this is why you have a specific plan. Someone else came in and said, can I do a scaled down version of that that's not as good? We said no, and then it became a solar farm. If only we could get a solar farm. Eric, if I may, I have comments.
Yeah, we have a couple minutes left on this one.
And I have so many comments. I'm going to try to keep them brief. A couple things come to mind. One is, from my perspective, I love the Windswept Farm. I sincerely hope that it stays. I have serious doubts about whether that should play into the specific plan approval or not. And I'll tell you why. There's no guarantee, even if the land is preserved for Windswept Farm and access to the things that the farm needs to sustain itself, that it will continue to operate. And so that benefit is tenuous. It's definitely, in my mind, a significant benefit to Williston, but does it qualify as being worth issuing a specific plan? I don't know. They could decide to stop operating it, and that would be the end of the benefit to a certain extent. So I do have concerns about that, not because I don't like the farm, but because I just don't know that it meets the needs of the town long term. So I really hope it stays. The other thing is that the land that they need to survive most likely is undevelopable because of the wetland buffers. And so the agricultural activity in that area is okay, but the development of that area is unlikely in any scenario. So I really hope they stay. I think they will stay no matter what happens here, but I don't know that it should play into the plan in terms of trying to meet the criteria. The other thing is, at a high level, I think, is that I'm really happy that you're representing us, Gary, because I think that you're a really critical thinker when it comes to these proposals and development, and there's going to be a lot of factors to play off. I completely agree with David that connectivity is an absolutely pivotal piece of this. It's not something that the Conservation Commission is after in our work, but it is like, this is like a linchpin in our connectivity plans for the town. This property, essentially connectivity toward Catamount, connectivity between the two schools, and all the new neighborhood housing that's going into the area. It's just, if we don't get it right, it's going to be a long time before we have another opportunity to make those connections. And then I think the view shed issue, if this went to a typical development review, I would be willing to fight tooth and nail to preserve that view shed.
Right.
I don't know that the DRB is in the same place in terms of what they would require based on our recommendations, but boy, I can't think of a more important view shed in our town. So those are my most important comments.
Just let me add to your assessment of the Windstep Farm. I think personally, I think it's also a limited number of people that take advantage of that, and many of them are, you might say, I don't know if you'd say privileged, but they have to have the resources to be able to participate in that. And so that, I don't know, personally, I think I'd rather see a town-wide benefit to this, but that still doesn't mean that shouldn't exist and continue. But I don't view that as a super great deal for the town if that is a piece of it.
And I don't think that Windswept was really named in a public benefit. I think it was more the view shed. I don't think Windswept was.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly was. It dominated the
just
comments.
in the background.
Yeah, in the background, it's so important to so many people.
And we have data to support that. I mean, we've favored that as a valuable property for, I don't know, ever since we started to make lists of those things, which was probably 15 years ago or something. And so we can just say, oh, look, we'll go back to our data. This is viewed as a very important natural resource piece of land for the town.
Oh, and I forgot to say, to Timon's point, it is not too late to have conversations with the Glazers about whether a portion of the land could be, the development rates could be sold or something. So that is not precluded by going through the specific plan process. So I don't want to lose track of that. We don't have a lot of money, but
well,
you know,
we can raise money. I mean, we did it with Catamount. It was, I mean, if it's really that important to everybody, then so I might want to figure out a way to do it.
I don't want to talk about that today because I know we're on time, Eric, but I do want to talk about that. I do want to talk about whether we want to pursue other avenues with them as well.
And I don't think that anyone has approached the Glazers about talking with the land trust. And I think it's as with David Herskowitz, it was up to David and the land trust to work together.
But how many acres is the Glazer property?
Yeah, I think
the land trust is only going to be interested if it's like 25 or more.
It's 100 acres.
It's 100 acre property.
Okay, then yeah.
There's a possibility that we could get matching funds. Yeah.
All right. Thanks everyone. Good conversation. We will definitely be having more of these on future agendas. Simon, was there anything else on this one that you needed us to cover today?
No.
Okay. All right. In that case, we're going to move on to the Vermont DEC Watershed Grant. Simon, I need a little help here remembering what we were going to talk about on this one.
So this was the watershed grant that's due February 8th. And there's various pockets of cash that are available sort of in watersheds. Generally speaking, they're grouped into things like education and outreach, planning, assessment, inventory, and monitoring, and then on the ground implementation. We don't have to do a match, but it does make our bid more competitive. I think this year they're emphasising education and outreach on flood resiliency measures to protect stream habitat, and they're focusing on groups that are new to the programme. And I think we just wanted to think about whether there was anything in particular we thought might be worthwhile going for on this. You know, maybe we don't. Bearing in mind the priorities. of the body.
Yeah, I'm opening up and looking at some of the projects that have been approved in the past to get an idea.
That list that's on there, Reed, is it this?
Yeah, that list. Yeah, yeah.
It looks like Williston has gotten one of those. I skimmed through that at some point. It was a few years ago.
Some water quality monitoring.
Is the Sustainable Williston, are they still working on planting trees on the Allen Brook? Is that still a project that's moving forward?
Chapin is definitely continuing to push forward with the Tree Island Community Forest, Town Forest idea. He's been leading some walks with various audiences to get feedback. There was actually a nature art installation that was just erected there that is buckthorn root system, and it's painted and tries to highlight the invasive work and the restoration work. And so I think in the future there might be opportunities as that plan kind of solidifies and some of the budget requirements to do more, like for instance, if there wanted to be like a some sort of platform where as an overlook that people can have informational signage and take in kind of what they can see from the landscape. It's an idea that Chapin's talked about before. You know, that would cost money and could potentially be used a good fit for a grant like this in the future. But I don't think it's to that point today. It's still just in its like infancy. A lot of just taking trees and putting them in the ground and trying to protect them and thinking about how people could access the site and best enjoy the site in the future. So it's still kind of in that planning phase. But I know that the most recent kind of walk or whatever that Chapin facilitated, I think you went to part of it, Simon, was kind of a site-by-site review of the different restoration efforts along Allen Brook and looking at kind of what was successful and what was not successful. Some of those sites were restored over a decade ago and others were more recent. So there was a chance to see like which species survived, which species did the beaver like to go for, what types of protection worked and didn't just leave a bunch of plastic in the environment or strangle the tree and things like that. So that was, I think, an interesting walk. And I don't know if anything came up there that.
Well, yeah, and it was good to see. And I think also, because there was someone there from the Intervale and someone, I think the Winooski Resource Conservation District. And I think they were talking about, you know, where are we targeting next? Where's a good place to target next for our tree planting? So I think they were looking at each individual site and figuring out where they should direct their efforts in the Allen Brook. So I think it was really helpful for them to see everything that happened. I've been sort of preceding, I guess it's probably over 15 years now that people have been working on that and seeing why it's been successful.
I did go on one of those walks with Chapin and it was great. I never knew that was there, the little tree island. And I do remember that protecting the trees from the beavers was one of the most important. If you're going to plant a tree or a shrub, you want to protect it against the beaver because they're there. And that definitely is a costly project as well as the tree itself.
Yeah, a lot of the trees are being donated. A bunch came from 350.org, some came from the Intervale, some significant trees, like we're talking like 10 to 15 footers. Chapin and I harvested from his land in Westford and brought and planted there. So there's kind of a variety of free trees that have been used. So far, we've tried to avoid buying anything. In terms of future restoration, did it seem, Simon, like there was kind of any imminency to wanting to do more restoration projects, or was it more like, let's start thinking about where we would do it?
Thinking about it, I think, I'm not sure, but I think someone has a plan to do some next year. That's what I understand.
Maybe it's the Winooski Conservation District. So they wouldn't need us to be applying for this. I'm just trying to think of anything that,
So one, if I can interrupt, one idea I was just thinking about is an education and outreach grant for work with the community to help them understand the ERF and other land conservation tools that we have to work with here in town. And then use those funds either, you know, to support or sponsor events or speakers or something like that to help elevate the conversation about conservation in the community. Wow, that's a lot of C's.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
What's the timeline for the grants, the funding?
February. I think we need to start spending it in August, I think. So they announce the winners in April and May.
Okay. So be ready by the late summer. So that could be an option, Eric. On a related note, I did get a yes back from Bob Heiser. I got a yes back from Jens. And I got a yes back from Kate
Warner. Yep.
Kate Warner. Yes, Warner. All three said yes, they would be interested in participating in an ERF education outreach initiative. I pitched it to them, at least at this point, as a single 2-hour event, but there is a ton of information, even just for me to try to review it takes a lot of time. As I look at the story maps and as I look at the SWHA update that we did, which I think in and of itself would be interesting to members of the public who want to know about, you know, how do we best conserve land in Williston, not just conserve any land, but how do we conserve the most valuable land, whether it's for biodiversity and species, or whether it's for forest blocks and carbon sequestration and storage. I mean, there's just so much information there that I could see, you know, if we did have access to funds, I could see it being more than one event, perhaps one event on like, how do we decide what to preserve, and one event on how do we go about preserving it. You know, it could be split up in a variety of different ways, and that would allow us to maybe have like Jens in. Maybe like Jens could come in for the first one and talk more about the what are we preserving, and then, you know, later we could and maybe somebody like Ethan if we're doing two events, and then we have a second event where we have more of like our land trust partners to talk about, you know, what are the avenues and where do the funds come from, how do you get those matching funds. So I think it could be a good option, Eric. I hadn't thought about applying for a grant for it. I always try to do stuff on the cheap. Volunteer my time and do it at the library.
You know? It's genetic from your dad.
That's so true.
Well, it sounds as if, you know, this Sustainable Williston seems to be good on what they're doing now with, you know, with their project on the Allen Brook. So maybe I think the ERF fund, and we talked about it last time, and I'm not sure really clear where the ERF stands. I know that's on the agenda, but you know, I think this would be a good way to go to the education and outreach.
We have the content as far as like a write-up of what we would use what the public benefit or the outreach would be. We would just have to figure out like, how do we intend to use the funds? How does that, if we had funding, what would we use it for? So if the commission's interested in it, I'm happy to work on an application for that purpose.
Can I put another idea out there? Not to, I think
Yeah,
that sounds
go for
great.
it. I was just going to ask for other ideas. So yeah, go for it, David.
I gravitated towards the opportunity for enhancing recreation and public enjoyment. And this might be an opportunity for us to either look at some of the primitive trails or easements that we have in place, but no real access points for community members. And this might be an opportunity to, do some trail widening or, take advantage of certain easements that we have in place, but not the funds to actually make it happen.
Let me piggyback on that. I think another thing I keep harping on is the ability to monitor how much use the trails have. So that, I don't know if we could piece that together with what you were thinking of, David, but as you know, the trails are more and more heavily used, particularly during COVID. And we've, argued to get more resources to take care of them. And one way to do that is if you have data showing how much the usage is, which is not an easy task without, we've talked about trail camera type things and that type of effort.
Does the town, Simon, does the town have money allocated for trail work for this fiscal year?
We have our capital budget for trail improvements, yeah. And we also have a general maintenance budget. I think that's for smaller items.
Unplanned,
unplanned, and purchasing materials for Anne.
So there's money available to do things like David's talking about already. It just needs to be used.
Possibly.
Yeah. So I think there's money just sitting there, that should be used. And I know the town, David, you weren't on the board, but the town hired a group, I think it was the SE group, to do an assessment of all the trails and how much it would take. And so there is an assessment done, and there is some money in the, budget to be doing these projects. So I think, we just need, and that's one of our charges.
You could pair some of that maintenance with an education or a kiosk, or like even just installing like a trail log to sort of do what Gary was suggesting, which is get a better count of who's using the trails and how frequently.
And I just happened to be at the select board meeting last night, and I sat and listened to, the meeting, and they were talking about the ARPA funds, and the ARPA funds are, they've spent a chunk of it so far, and the next portion, which is $1.6 million, is they're going to go to the community, the town people, and ask them, what do you think this needs to be spent on? So that might be a perfect opportunity to say, hey, our trail system was heavily used during COVID, and we were almost a lifesaver for a lot of people, but we've done not much work on those trails, and they got used a lot. So that might be an idea, is to, go look to the ARPA fund to do some of these repairs and improvements.
And
just two thoughts about Gary's data collection. One is that I currently have a project with a graduate student who's using Strava to get a count of recreation increase throughout the northern forest. She's specifically looking at mountain biking, but we're essentially, this first phase of her research is like trying to figure out how valid it is to use Strava, like what percentage of recreators are on Strava. Can we really measure an increase using Strava, or is it measuring an increase in Strava users, right? Like all of those questions. And so I can just like keep this group updated about like, how does that work as a data source? Is it legit, rather than having trail counters or students like sitting out there with clipboards, which is like the old school way, right? And then the second part is that I was very tangentially involved with a thesis that came out of the University of Maine and from Gary Jessica Leahy's lab that used something called Streetlight, which is like a big data harvesting. I think I've mentioned it on to this committee before, but essentially like when they install like the Acadia National Park did this, they install these little data collection boxes, and when people pass by, it pulls the zip code from your cell phone plan. Whoa. And it allowed Acadia to get like this really clear snapshot of users without, like during COVID, without having to have like people contact. And it was, I think it was pretty expensive, but it also let them see like where folks were coming from, what hours were the peaks, when was like the road congested, when were there like real concerns about like proximity given the virus, blah, blah, blah. And it was like a pretty seamless data pull.
Yeah.
I'm just putting it out there that like these, I think we're moving to an era where we're like using social media to get accurate trail counts of like who's using trails when at what time. And we're figuring out like what all the best sources of data for that are. Streetlight exists. It does have like a price for academics. And then like Strava has been pretty straightforward with just like, here's the data, which I know they've given it to Williston before also. So those are just mostly just like, here are some things we could think about.
I also want to just support David's idea, and we've thought about this before, but I think it's good to think about it again, is to complete some of the connections. I think we do have a few we could probably complete now if we look in our records of easements and such. So I think that's a good idea.
All right, so I'm hearing, I guess, 3 different suggestions that have kind of led to some discussion. One around community outreach for the ERF and land conservation in general in town, and then 2 around recreation. One for looking at ways to document use of rec trails in town, and then a 3rd around expanding and maintaining the trail network. Is that right? That 3rd one?
Connecting easement.
Connecting. That's what I want. Not expanding, but connecting. Yes.
Can I ask one clarifying question, Eric, before we talk more about the 3 ideas there?
Yeah, I don't know how much time we have to talk about them, but yeah.
Well, I just wanted, I think it's important that otherwise I wouldn't ask. I think our capital budget, Simon, is really for just the idea, the items that need replacement on the SEC group's list, right? That the analysis they did for us. So it's not funds to say, oh, this section of the trail is kind of getting a lot of use, let's like reroute it or something like that. It's really to replace specific priced out items.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you feel that something that maintains a trail would benefit from a reroute, okay, to me that's sort of maintenance, because you're taking away from a sort of damaged area and putting on something else.
Would that be capital budget, or would that be out of our maintenance bucket?
It would be capital.
It would be, okay. All right. So we could use those funds. I just want to make sure that what Terry was saying about like, well, you know, there's funds there and how we use them is our choice. I want to make sure that like if we chose to use some of them for something we didn't plan to do on the long-term plan, would we be taking it away from something that we need to replace on a certain timeline?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think if we don't use it and it just sits in a pot, the town is going to say, well, why do you need these funds? You know, why do you need that sitting in the bank if you're not going to use it? So, and I've been on the trails. I'm a trail steward for Mud Pond. I've been up 5 Tree Hill. I've been up Sucker Brook, and you know, they need help. There's a lot of places where it needs, you know, punch-ins and raised areas to get people off the land, you know, to save that. So yeah, I think there's money in the budget, and also I think the ARPA, you know, I think this is the time to reach out. And I guess my thought about the ERF education part for the grant is that that's now. I don't think we have any money in any budget that's going to be able to for us to use that for speakers and advertising and things like that. So yeah, that would be more of like a now kind of an ask for the grant, as opposed for David. That's great. I mean, we really need help on those trails. They need maintenance, they need repair, but there's money in the budget for that. So we have it there, and the ARPA fund, which is available to, I think, 2026.
Eric, I think the ERF initiative could survive without funding. So I think if we think there's something there to apply for related to connectivity and usage, I think that should take precedence.
And without funds, Reed, you mean just?
I think we can run them for free.
Volunteer work and so I was surprised. I asked the Observer to, put something in the paper about the ERF, and they said, I'll write a letter to the editor. They were not willing to write about the ERF, and I haven't.
That was the response I got too when I asked them.
There's no interest there. I was kind of not very happy with that.
I wasn't.
I put a lot of things about Christmas trees.
Well, I think that's a different question if it occurs after Reed's done his presentations. If someone said to me, "Do you want an article about the ERF, Environmental Reserve Fund?" I don't know if I'd be that interested in publishing it because it sounds really boring. But
thanks a lot.
We feel it's important.
Those people getting people engaged and people understanding like what that is and how it translates to everything they're concerned about, it's a lot more interesting. And I think the Observer follows what people are interested in.
And something's written that includes there's an event coming up you can attend. Yeah. I think that's more engaging.
Either maybe before it, a little announcement, but then like you said, Simon, is during it, get them to come to it and observe and learn and find out what the public want out of it. And might be good.
So it's about the ERF fund is about conservation. And I think people in town have voiced their opinions about conservation, especially around when the glacier parcel came up to be developed back in 2019 when Matt put the article in the Front Porch Forum. And that got people pretty excited. 70 pages of comment about people were tired of development and they wanted to see more land conserved. And now the glacier parcel is back up for,
actual development.
And there still is public outcry because now we've got, the Catamount Golf Course being developed. We've got the Essex Alliance Church being, developed. We've got the Trinity Baptist potential. So there's a lot. The people that is on people's minds. Yep.
Okay, so we have a couple minutes left, and I need to move on at 9 for my own board meeting. All right, so we have the application deadline for this is February 8th. So we have one more Conservation Commission meeting that we can take to review or discuss a proposal. Can I get a couple of volunteers to work with Simon on drafting up some bullets to put together for a proposal for the trail network idea?
I'd be interested in reviewing what opportunities might be. And so if Simon, you want to reach out, I'd be happy to work with you. I might need some help though in identifying that as far as what's out there.
Yeah.
My tenure packet is due January 30th, and so I have forbidden myself from volunteering to do anything else. Otherwise I would totally help out with it.
There's 31 days in January, so you've got that the 31st you can work on this, Kim.
This is like the most monumental undertaking I had, truly.
You look tired.
I've been working on it for like a month already. Anyway, this neither here nor there. I just wanted to say I would be happy to do a proofread after or work on it after the packet goes in. And also there's that prioritization of trails that we should focus on that my students did in as a class project some number of years ago. So like, could that get looked at? I don't know if that's helpful.
Are you familiar with that one, Simon? Okay. We'll see if we can find it.
If you can't find it, I'm sure that it's like buried in a folder of student projects somewhere on my computer.
I think it's on the website, and I think I was looking at it a couple weeks ago because that's what I was channeling with that suggestion, was that there were a couple really good ideas for Mud Pond or the property over down by the river that we're trying to get access to. So I think that they're on the website.
Excellent.
All right. We also have a layer somewhere of the easements so that we could glance at that and see a couple of connections that we might be able to start with, I think.
Eric, do you want me to take over so you can get to your board meeting and we can
actually have to
close out?
Yeah.
Well, we should be adjourning anyway.
Okay.
So can I get one more person to work with David and Simon on this? So our next meeting is February 1st, which gives us, it's actually, the timing works out well because it still gives us another week before the application deadline. But it would be nice to have, something fleshed out, even in rough draft form for the group to look at for the February 1st meeting.
I gotta stay focused on ERF.
I mean, I think maybe I'd be happy to participate, maybe with David and Simon and whoever else is it, just with a short meeting to try to develop those bullets. I don't think that would be too difficult.
Okay.
What do you think, Simon? Yeah. If you line something up on
Zoom or something.
Yeah.
Great. All right. I will let the three of you work that out.
Nothing complicated. I don't have time for that either.
Yeah. And we can talk about that on the 1st. Just really quickly on the environmental reserve fund, the select board did agree to support the ERF in this next budget at 50,000, so half of what we asked for. Still, I'm not all that thrilled with that, but it's better than zero. I may still submit something to the Williston Observer as a letter to the editor or whatever it is, the 400 character or word limit thing. I just haven't had a chance to do that yet, but that's the quick update on that one.
I would really hope that you do, Eric. And if you can't, just bandwidth wise, I'll find a way to do one. It's important.
Yeah, well, I just need to find, we're going to just dig up the post that I put in the Front Porch Forum a couple of weeks ago and modify that. All right, and then the most important decision we have to make today is February 1st, who's going to bring food. And I will volunteer to do that for the next meeting. I'll plan to be there in person. I will make scones for Kim. So that means that you need to be there in person too, Kim.
Oh, I will come in person for your scones.
All right.
So
I'll bring some scones to the February 1st meeting, and I will look forward to seeing you all then. And I need to go. So thank you. Have a good day.
Everyone.
Thanks.